Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Guatemala is at a pivotal moment in its history. And so we are going to do a deep dive into what is happening in the country of Guatemala. But first, this is Latina Literati. In honor of the October Revolution, we're going to take a look at the historical context of what is happening. It's a very exciting time. There is a lot of apprehension in the air, and for the first time in a long time, you can sense the hope. People are hopeful that change is coming. But first, let's talk a little bit. We won't go all the way back, but we'll go back at least to independence from Spain. So 1821, Central America, Guatemala, and eventually Mexico, all of the countries receive independence from Spain. And since that time, basically military dictators have been in charge of the country on behalf of the land-owning class. So from 1821 to about 1944, you basically have strong men. And in fact, some say that it is Guatemala where the term is first used, banana republic. And in 1944, there's a general strike, and a man by the name of General Ubico is forced to resign. And so who was General Ubico? Well, he forced indigenous people to work for free, so basically indentured servitude for the indigenous majority. There were a lot of disappearances and murders of intellectuals and anyone that was against him. So he was eventually forced to resign. And then we have what is called the 10 years of democratic spring. It is springtime for 10 years in Guatemala. A military junta prepares for elections. It allows for the first time for labor to organize. It allows people to speak out. It allows democratic expression. And Juan José Arévalo is the leading candidate and becomes the first democratically elected president of Guatemala. And so he, in his administration, understands that now we're in the 1940s, it's after World War II, people understand what it is to fight for democracy, and so there's a breath of fresh air. So under his administration, there's a new constitution drafted, and so for the first time you have a labor code. All of a sudden, people can't force you to work. For the landowners, all of a sudden you have to have breaks and specific working hours and actually get paid for your work. Also, the Social Security Administration is established under his presidential term. And perhaps most importantly, he encourages the Maya majority to organize and to have their leaders represent them for the first time. So this is crucial in what will happen from 1944 on. In a sense, what happens is the Arévalo administration transfers political power from the military to civil society for the first time in Guatemalan history. And so it is again called the October Spring Revolution because people are finally able to express themselves, are able to come together to gather and to discuss what issues affect them for the first time in a very public way. So this is truly a call for a more just and more equitable society for all, but especially for the Maya majority. Jacobo Arbenz is then democratically elected to then take power after the presidential term of Arévalo, and his administration goes even further. His administration says, look, a lot of landowners aren't even using their land. So we're going to take the land that is not being used and return it to the Maya people from which it was stolen. Because remember, the Spanish come in and just take all the land, right? And now you have a government who's recognizing that people need land to grow food to survive. And so he says the land that is not being used is going to be returned to the people. One of the largest landowners in Guatemala is the United Fruit Company. And you have two shareholders there. So you have John Foster Dulles, who is the U.S. Secretary of State, and you have his brother, Allen Dulles, who was head of the CIA. And they were incensed that a government would dare touch their interests, the corporate interests that benefited them personally, in order to provide benefits to the people. I mean, how could that possibly be that the people are more important than corporate interests? So you can see that this is coming to a head. And what happens is that the Dulles brothers convince the US government to overthrow the democratically elected government in Guatemala. What happens? The CIA organizes a group in Honduras. They come in under a military guy, Castillo Armas, and they overthrow the Arbenz government. Just a personal note here, my father-in-law tells a story that he was a teenager, young teenager. He says thousands of young men went to the presidential palace and begged Jacobo Arbenz to give them arms. Let us defend our nation. It's being invaded. Let us die in the glory of defending our nation. And Jacobo Arbenz said to them, I will not sacrifice all of you in a fight that cannot be won. I will go into exile in order to spare the blood of my people. So you can see how very angry society was that an outside power is coming in and invading and putting a strong man in again, a military guy. And not only that, but some of the officers, the military officers, are incensed that they would profane the national honor by allowing these people to just come and take over the country again. So it is the military officers that go off and begin the first armed resistance. This armed resistance would last 40 years, and millions of people would die and be affected by it. The civil war in Guatemala is considered the modern genocide of the world. 10% of the Guatemalan population is murdered, mostly civilian and mostly by the military. So that deserves its own video. But when we say civil war in Guatemala, we're not talking about skirmishes. We're talking about out and out murder of civilians. So we're going to fast forward to December 29th, 1996. We have the signing of the peace accords between the armed resistance and the government of Guatemala. And so some of the things that were promised have never been delivered, and some of them have. And now we're past 25 years since those peace accords were signed, and we still have people asking for a more equitable, more just society. And so that's where we are today. That's where our narrative of the situation in Guatemala begins. Remember, 70% of the land, arable land, is still held by only 2% of the population. So there's still a lot of inequality. And to the surprise of everyone, the son of the first democratically elected president, Juan José Arévalo, who is named Bernardo Arévalo, has just been elected to be the next president of Guatemala. So people are euphoric. In fact, there are beautiful pictures of people who voted for his father and voted for him because they understand the Arévalo family is dedicated to the people of Guatemala. And so people are euphoric. But what happens? You have a corrupt system, and they start to pick at the candidate that's won. They say his party wasn't registered properly, which is a lie. They come and take ballots to check them and take pictures of that. All of that is illegal. And so you have a situation where the corrupt party in power doesn't want to give up power and doesn't want to give up its grimy little hands on the national treasury. So, of course, they're putting up all sorts of obstacles so that Arévalo can't take power on January 14th. And the people have come out to the streets. Every major road has been blocked. Guatemala was at a standstill. Nothing was coming in and out. The airport was said to have stopped accepting flights or been able to provide gasoline. Everything stopped, and there have been negotiations now. So we hope that the people, having exercised their constitutionally protected right to express themselves and to defend the democratic processes for which they have fought so hard, we hope that this will be resolved in the way that the people want it to be resolved, and that Arévalo will indeed take power on the 14th of January. But I wanted to share all of this with you because it's incredibly exciting, and it's one of the few times that the people of a country can go out, voice their opinion, and hopefully make a difference in what's happening in that country. And so you may ask, well, what are they asking for? They're asking for a number of people to resign. The Attorney General of the country, her name is Consuelo Porras, has been accused of putting innocent people in jail because they were either investigating or writing about corruption in Guatemala. Dozens of journalists have had to leave Guatemala for fear of imprisonment or worse because they were touching subjects that were supposedly untouchable by the corrupt administration. So you have a serious situation that can only be made better if Consuelo Porras resigns and there's a judge who was supposedly working with her, Freddy Orellana, and other functionaries that are tainted by having covered up corruption. And so they're saying these people have to go. And so that's the first step. And of course, when President Arevalo takes office in January, I'm sure that there will be other steps put in place to ensure integrity in the different systems. Now for my favorite part of the video, the book recommendations. We have to begin with the book, The Brothers, John Foster Dulles, Alan Dulles, and the CIA Secret War. We've mentioned this book before, but it is dead on with regard to what's happening in the history of Guatemala. So if you haven't picked it up or read it, please do at your local bookseller or your local library. We love our libraries. We love our local booksellers. And if perchance that's not available to you, we always include the books in links in the description box for your purchase from independent booksellers online. The second book is Bitter Truth. Again, a book I think I've mentioned before. The truth about the CIA coup in Guatemala, also spot on if you want to delve more into the details of this particular coup. Another fascinating point is that the same people involved in derailing and coup d'etat-ing the first democratically elected president of Iran come directly from Iran to Guatemala to do the same thing. Fascinating. What a different world we would be in if Iran's first democratically elected president had not been couped. What would it be if Iran were a democracy? Very interesting. But no, the US said, we want to ensure that we have all of the rights to the oil, and we're going to take it away from the British through a coup. But that's a whole other video. So the last book I'm going to recommend is by a Guatemalan legend. His name is Luis Cardosa y Aragon. After the coup against Arbenz, he flees to Mexico, where he spends the rest of his life writing about his country and what it's like to have democracy snatched from you. His book, Las Líneas de su Mano, I'll try and find it in both English and Spanish and link it below, is just a beautiful poetic essay of love to Guatemala and to what it meant for him to have this breath of fresh democratic air ripped from the society that he loves so much. So I hope you've enjoyed this content. And thank you so much for joining me on this joint journey. As always, we would love to hear from you. What are you reading? What do you think of this content? What would you like us to present? We've done it before and we'll do it again. Tell us what you'd like to hear about and we'll present it for you. We would love you to subscribe to Latina Literati. This is a community and we're growing, and I'm very happy that you're a part of it. And remember, as we say in Spanish, I'll say it first in English, people that is united can never be defeated. Un pueblo unido nunca será vencido. Mucho cariño, mucho salud y mucho amor. Gracias.